Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to part 2 of the Unit Review Solution Manual. This will cover the section entitled Find Slope from Each Table. So when we are doing this, we are working under the assumption that the slope is equal to the change in the y over the change in x. So a slightly different version of the slope equation. It really means the same thing as the slope formula we saw in the previous video, and really will mean the same thing that we saw in the, or will see in the slope from a graph section later on, as well as the graphing problem. So when we look at these tables have an x column and a y column. What we need to do is figure out the pattern in that column. So to get from 1 to 7, we need to add 6. To get from 7 to 13, we add 6 again. To get from 13 to 19, once again, we add 6. So the pattern is each line we are adding 6 to the y. This number plus 6 is known as the change in y. We do the same thing for the x column. To get from 0 to 3, we need to add 3. To get from 3 to 6, we need to add 3. To get from 6 to 9, we need to add 3. That is our change in x, is positive 3. Slope is defined as the change in y divided by the change in x. So we would simply go in here and we would say, okay, well the change in y is positive 6. The change in x is positive 3. Then we would look at that fraction, positive 6 over positive 3, and we would say to ourselves, positive 6 divided by positive 3 is 2. So the slope for this table is 2. Okay, on to the next one. Same idea. We need to find the pattern. So to get from 1 to negative 1, we need to subtract 2. This pattern should be based on either addition or subtraction. Okay? If you are unsure what the pattern is, you can always take the second number and subtract the first number, and that will always give you your pattern for a column. It doesn't matter what table you're looking at. If you use those two, you will get the pattern. So our change in y is negative 2. For the x, we are increasing by 1, which can be somewhat difficult to see with negative numbers, but we are increasing by 1. So the change in x is positive 1. So then we would go to slope. Okay, well the slope is the change in y, which is negative 2, divided by the change in x, which is positive 1. Negative 2 divided by positive 1 would give us a slope of negative 2. On to number 8. 7 to 9 is a gain of 2. We're going up by 2. We are increasing by 2 in the y column. So the change in y is positive 2. The x's, they are increasing by 1 unit. We're going up by 1. Increasing by 1. So our change in x is positive 1. So again, our slope is change in y, which is positive 2, divided by the change in x, which is positive 1. 2 divided by 1 is 2. 9 and 10 are the same thing, except the table has been turned sideways. So again, we look for the pattern in the y's. To get from 10 to 8, we need to subtract 2. To get from 8 to 6, we need to subtract 2. To get from 6 to 4, we need to subtract 2. So our change in y is negative 2. Then we go to the x column, or row in this case. We do the same thing. We're increasing by 3 each time. So our change in x is positive 3. Our slope is the change in y over the change in x. Our change in y is negative 2. Our change in x is positive 3. Those do not actually divide, so we're going to end up with a fractional slope here, negative 2/3. Final example in this section, for the y, we are increasing by 4 each time. Means the change in y is positive 4. And for the x, we are going up by 1 each time, meaning the change in x is positive 1. So our slope again is change in y over change in x. So positive 4 divided by positive 1. 4 divided by 1 is 4. Again, there will be additional videos in this video series to cover each section in order. Thank you very much for your time and attention. On to the next video for the next section.